morning, everyone, especially to Sagar and Jetty, who is recovering from the Eagles game. He was actually there, so big congrats to Ryan and Sagar. Krystal, how are you?
Oh, that's right. Ryan is an Eagles fan. This is outrageous.
It's not good.
This is outrageous.
It's not good. It's not good.
I was a long-suffering Washington football fan. When I was a kid, they were so good, and then they were just terrible forever. So I hadn't watched any of their games in like a decade, and then I watched this one, and of course, because I watched they lost. So I'm sorry, everybody. I really blame myself.
She really was beating herself up this morning. I can attest to that. And
I'm a curse
fair.
on every team. So
fair, but at least you have some self-awareness.
Yeah. So sorry, guys. I will stop watching again. Don't worry. Lots to get to this morning, including we had to add yesterday evening, there was a big showdown between the Colombian president and Donald Trump. We'll tell you where that stands this morning over deportations on military planes. There's actually a number of countries that are taking a lot of issue with that. So we will break all of that down for you. You've also got some, very disturbing comments from Trump pushing ethnic cleansing in the Gaza Strip. So we'll break all of those details down for you. And also the Israelis really violating the ceasefire agreements both in Gaza and in Lebanon. Elon decided to go and speak at the AfD rally. That's that far-right party in Germany. We'll tell you what he said, stoking more controversy about his political views. Trump purged a number of inspectors general. It appears to have been blatantly illegal the way he did it, so there is a fight brewing there as well, with even Republicans who are perturbed, I guess I would say, by that. We're also taking a look at, this is maybe the most important story of the day, a new AI development out of China. They have now launched a competitor, a Chinese company launched a competitor to ChatGPT and Meta's offerings, et cetera, called DeepSeek. They did it for wildly less money and less what they call compute in terms of the chips that it requires, and really has shocked Silicon Valley, could put a real squeeze on our stock market. Huge implications here. We're going to have Arnaud Bertrand join us to break down these developments and what it means more broadly. And very excited to have Andrew Callahan on of Channel 5 News. He just dropped a new documentary. It's really interesting. It follows this one man who's been sort of like radicalized into all the wildest conspiracies on the MAGA side, and what led him there and what he's all about. And he just sort of like digs into this man's life and his family, et cetera. And it's really interesting. I think you guys will like it, so we're excited to talk to Andrew about that.
Yes, we absolutely are. It's fantastic, and he will be here later in the show. So Krystal, let's get started with Colombia, because yesterday was a roller coaster for Colombians, for the United States, and it looks like maybe there's resolution, at least for now.
Yeah, so the TLDR is, all of these Central and South American countries have been routinely accepting deportation flights from the U.S., typically ICE charters civilian planes, but Trump has decided to use, in addition to those civilian planes, use military planes. And they really have taken this as a sort of affront in addition to the treatment of the migrants, of the deportees who were on these planes. There have been images circulating. In fact, we can put this first tweet up on the screen, which contains some of these images. You can see people being led off the plane. I think this is actually in Brazil, in shackles, in handcuffs and shackles. There were also reports that some of these deportees to Brazil in particular were denied water, denied bathroom, and treated, according to them, with a total lack of dignity. So this is the president of Colombia weighing in, saying, "A migrant is not a criminal, must be treated with the dignity that a human being deserves. That's why I turned back U.S. military planes that were carrying Colombian migrants. I cannot allow migrants to remain in a country that does not want them. But if that country sends them back, it must be with dignity and respect for them and for our country. We will receive our fellow citizens on civilian planes without treating them like criminals. Colombia is respected." So Trump, wasting no time, jumps in with a major economic threat here. He says, "I was just informed that 2 repatriation flights from the U.S. with a large number of illegal criminals were not allowed to land in Colombia. This order was given by Colombia's socialist president, Gustavo Petro, who is already very unpopular amongst his people. Petro's denial of these flights has jeopardized the national security and public safety of the U.S., so I've directed my administration to immediately take the following urgent and decisive retaliatory measures. Number 1, and this is the most significant, emergency 25% tariff on all goods coming to the U.S. In 1 week, the 25% tariffs will be raised to 50%. A travel ban and immediate visa revocations on the Colombian government officials and all allies and supporters. And there were a number of other sanctions and provisions here which were threatened. So, in the next development, the Colombian president chimes in and offers to allow the use of his presidential plane to help repatriate deportees from the US. So he's offering the use of his presidential plane, again, underscoring that what was really objected to here was the use of military planes to do these flights. There were hundreds of these during the Biden administration. It was the change to use of military planes that irked this president. Also, I think the president of Honduras has weighed in. Lula down in Brazil was upset by this. Claudia Sheinbaum, it appears, may have also rejected one of these military planes landing. So that was really kind of the beef. And then we have the next piece, which is a lengthy post from Gustavo Petro. I won't read the whole thing, but suffice it to say that he and President Trump, Emily, I would say they sort of match each other's freak.
Yeah. Oh, well said. Yeah, well said.
Trump, I don't really like to. This is a translation from Google. I'm sure it's not entirely accurate, so do take it with a grain of salt. But he says, in part, Trump, I don't really like traveling to the U.S. It's a bit boring, but I confess there are some commendable things. I like going to the black neighborhoods of Washington, where I saw an entire fight in the U.S. Capitol between blacks and Latinos with barricades, which seemed like nonsense to me because they should join together. I confess I like Walt Whitman and Paul Simon and Noam Chomsky and Miller. I don't know who Miller is, do you?
I'm not sure what he's going for.
I'm thinking not Stephen Miller. Probably.
Oh, you know what? But what if it is? What if this is his appeal to Trump?
That would be a real twist. Anyway, at some point, I believe he indicates that Trump is trying to push him out of power. He says, "Overthrow me, President, and the Americas and humanity will respond."
But don't forget producer Mac's favorite line.
Oh.
Maybe one day over a glass of whiskey, which I accept despite my gastritis.
We can talk frankly about this, but it's difficult because you consider me an inferior race, and I'm not, nor is any Colombian. Anyway, the TLDR of this is that he ends up also threatening retaliatory tariffs in response. That was where things stood yesterday until later in the evening. And now it looks like we have come to some sort of a resolution. Put this last piece. It looks like Colombia is confirming some sort of deal has been made. Notes that Colombia's foreign minister and its ambassador to the U.S. will be holding high-level talks, and also states Colombia's president continues to make the presidential plane available for Colombian nationals who were set to be deported to return home. And they even accepted, Emily, the use of the controversial military planes. So anyway, that's where everything went. Obviously, the big picture here is, these heads of state bumping heads, and the, Trump administration being quite aggressive. But also, I just look at this and I know that people are going, oh, Trump stood up to them and they won. First of all, it's Colombia. Like, who do you think is going to win in that fight against the giant superpower? But second of all, you won what? The ability to continue to do deportation flights that have been going on routinely for years and years with no incident. So it's sort of this drama and fight and spectacle over really kind of nothing.
There's also an argument. I was talking to Juan David Rojas, who covers Central America very well, and he was saying the effect of this, the consequence of this might actually push Colombia closer to China.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
And not just Colombia.
Right. Oh, 100%. And that's already a problem. Obviously, it's the problem that Donald Trump says he's responding to in Panama. But if that's the consequence of this, which it very likely could be, that's very problematic for the Trump agenda in Central America. So we'll see. Obviously, there's more to come on that. But I think there is something to the stepping back. When Petro was saying you can't treat Colombians like criminals, it goes back to those flights of Haitians that were taking place during the Biden administration. They were basically rioting to get off the planes. They so badly did not want to go back to Port-au-Prince that they were, so I understand why the Trump administration is flying them back in handcuffs, but then you would also understand why the president, who's far left, would be saying this is causing me a problem because now I look like I'm cooperating with people who are being treated poorly, Colombians who are being treated poorly.
It's just this sense of disrespect. Because these are by and large people who are just, in certain instances, like in Venezuela, for example, Venezuela does not accept our deportation flights, but they're literally fleeing the sanctions that we have imposed and the economic hardship there. So to have people shackled. The other thing is the use of the military planes. It's really meant to sort of provoke these fights. I think that Trump feels like this whole showdown really serves the propaganda he wants to put out about we're really getting tough on immigration and we're throwing our weight around in the world and we're not being pushed around anymore, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is that there's no real reason to use military planes. In fact, I looked it up. So the cost of the civilian flights that ICE charters are roughly around $8,000, $9,000. The cost of these military flights is upward of $800,000. So wildly more expensive, sparking diplomatic crises throughout, Central and South America. And I think the broader picture is, like you said, Emily, and Arnaud Bertrand, who we have on later in the show, is a good observer of these things too. It's very late. I mean, Trump's already picked fights with Canada, Mexico, with Panama, with now we've got Honduras and Brazil, and obviously with Colombia. And it's kind of like, over what? And all of these countries individually, no one of them can hope to sort of stand up against the economic military might of the United States of America. But at some point, they're going to get smart and say, but, we do have other alternatives at this point. Like the multipolar world with BRICS and with China, that's already a reality. We have other patrons that we can go to and that we can become more cozy with, and we can ourselves band together and have more strength in numbers, because individually, none of them stands a chance. But it's a preview of, I think, the way things are going to continue to operate. And it could have really far-reaching ultimate consequences if he continues to behave in this way. And again, it's like, for what? To be able to fly these deportation flights, which have been a regular occurrence for years and years, and you just provoked this incident and are now like claiming a victory just to be able to do the thing that has already been done without incident for years.
It's interesting because I guess one counter argument would be on the point of respect. I think what Trump is trying to say is that he feels as though they actually are criminals because they committed a crime by crossing the border illegally, and that's sort of the baseline. Like, we just can all accept it. He's trying to say, I think, if we all accept that, then we can have, whatever diplomatic negotiations. But if you won't accept that, it's a matter of respect, blah, blah, blah. What's interesting about that is not every government in Central America has facilitated the exodus, right? Like, it's not, like, Mexico is a very different case study. Like, Mexico actually really hasn't facilitated the exodus of people up through these, like, cartel pathways, which is so sad to see what it's done to those countries. And I'm not saying that Donald Trump has that in mind, like pushing back on the cartel takeover of some of these countries, which is obviously a problem in Mexico. But Claudia Sheinbaum, for example, I mean, it's hard to connect her to actual cartel, like she's not in the pockets of cartels. There was some of that with AMLO. There was some speculation going back years when it came to AMLO, but they're not all in the pockets of cartels. But that said, I think there is something really important about understanding from the president's perspective that if you continue to allow people to send all of these migrants, it's just padding the pockets of the cartels that are literally taking over their territory. And that's actually helpful for negotiating because a lot of them want help with that too. And I mean, if you're pushing them closer to China, I don't know that any problem gets solved.
Yeah. I mean, he doesn't want to frame them as criminals in the sense of like they committed the crime of crossing the border. He routinely talks about, he made up this thing about, oh, you're emptying your mental asylums, whatever, which many people have speculated he's confused between people who are seeking asylum and who were at insane asylums.
Amazing.
Because there's no evidence that any of these countries emptied their asylums. This isn't like some, Muriel boat lift situation from Cuba where they literally did like empty their prisons and send them to us. So I think he wants the imagery of all migrants are criminals, like hardened criminals, like committing violent crimes here in America, which we know is obviously not the truth. Like there are some who have committed crimes, but the overall crime rate is lower among both documented and undocumented immigrants to the U.S. So in any case, I think the use of the military planes, the insistence on shackling people and treating them like they're these like hardened, like they're freaking serial killers or something like that. I do think this is sort of the fight and the imagery that he ultimately wants. And I think there will be a lot of that in terms of his immigration policy. Like obviously what he's done with his executive orders and his approach is already very hardline. But in addition, ICE doesn't have any more resources than they did under Biden. In fact, so far, the number of deportations under Trump, well, it's very early days, obviously, but it's roughly the same number that Biden has been had been doing, on a daily basis during his term in office as well. So what he wants, in part, is this show of force to overcome the fact that, they don't have nearly the amount of resources to detain and deport every undocumented immigrant who is here in the U.S. So whereas the Biden administration really wanted to kind of keep under wraps these images of deportations and the ugliness and the sort of cruelty involved in that, Trump has the exact opposite motivation, which he wants to put it on display.
Yeah, Biden quietly bribed Haiti into taking back flights. They didn't want anyone to know it. It was reported in the New York Post.
Biden deported more. Now, there were more migrants coming in, but Biden deported more people than Trump did during his first 4-year term in office. You would never know that, both because of the way it was covered, but also because, the Biden administration didn't serve the propaganda, direction that they wanted to go in. Whereas with Trump, I think you're going to see some of these, they're highlighting these ICE raids that are going on already, et cetera. So I think this is part of that spectacle that he wants, and he can sort of claim this win here and also underscore his narrative of the world that these migrants are criminals, and not just in the sense of they cross the border illegally, but they're with the cartels, or they're a drug dealer, they're murderers, they're violent, et cetera, et cetera. That's part of what you want from imagery of people who are shackled and treated in this way on military planes.
Well, they're definitely going. I mean, they've said that they're starting with people who are in the country illegally and have committed crimes, which is going to be an interesting thing in Chicago, because right now Chicago is a sanctuary city. Technically, doesn't have to cooperate with ICE when they're trying to get people out of the prison or out of the jails, basically. And that's now one of the things that Tom Homan, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal just this morning, is talking about is if you don't let us into the jails, we're going to have a problem, because what we're trying to do in this first couple of weeks is deport people, send people back who have committed crimes beyond just crossing the border illegally. And I think where the rubber is really going to meet the road is when the Trump administration doesn't have the optics of just flying military-aged men back on military planes, which is, when you look at the images, at least from a PR standpoint, as sad as it is to say, you can see what they're doing. They're actually going specifically for military-aged males, the least sympathetic case.
I know in the instance of Brazil, there were families and kids on those planes.
Really?
So
the ones they're putting out, the ones the administration's published,
highlighting,
leading with.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And so I think where the rubber's going to meet the road is when we see them going into cities like Chicago, whatever, and maybe they take the people out of the jails and they get cooperation, but then what happens? Then what's next? How are they going to handle that? Are they going to keep going full Homan when it is, when the optics are you have news cameras with you and it's women and children? I
mean, I think that they want that. I genuinely think they want that, because they believe in this deterrent effect, right? That if you put sort of fear and cruelty on display, that will force people to leave, to not come in the first place. So that's part of their, their theory and their ideology. And the irony is, if you compare the Trump administration the first time and the Biden administration in terms of the number of actual criminals, not just crossing the border, but actual criminals who were released, there were more under the Trump administration. And that makes sense, because the Biden administration and the Obama administration deported more than any of these people. He earned that title, the deporter in chief. But they made a concerted effort to focus their deportation efforts on criminals. And if you know that that's sort of the policy of the government, then if you're not a criminal, you feel like, I'm probably okay. I need to be careful, but I'm probably okay. The Trump administration, both in the first term and it appears in this term as well, they would rather have cast a broader net, because that helps to put the fear of deportation in everyone. So you don't have that sense of well, if I didn't do anything wrong, I'm probably going to be okay. So that's part of their sort of ideologically different approach, is that they actually don't laser focus on just the criminals. And the Lake and Riley Act, similar thing, requires people who have been, who have been arrested for even something really minor like shoplifting, requires them to be detained and then prioritized for deportation. Well, again, there's only ICE doesn't have unlimited resources. So if you're focused on, just to use the most sympathetic, a mom who shoplifted diapers over an actual gang cartel member, that is a change in prioritization. That means you are going to have fewer resources to go after actually the more hardened criminals who have, who are undocumented. Then the Trump administration wants to sort of capture a larger number of people and a larger sort of breadth of types of migrants who have come here. Some of them who even came here through this process set up with the Biden administration, the CBP1 app, and claimed asylum and all of that as well.
I mean, that's probably the most difficult thing for the Trump administration. And actually, as much as I sadly do believe in the deterrent problem here, or the deterrent effect here, because I've talked to people who work in Mexico, like immigration at refugee centers and everything, and they say they've begged the government to do more and tell people don't come. And one of the reasons I think it's so tragic is that the Biden administration, with their asylum expansion, has put a lot of people in those situations now where they get into the country, they try to start lives, most of them have work permits, and the Trump administration and the Biden administration, if the Trump administration takes people who are here legally through asylum, expanded asylum, and deports them, that's disgusting. As much as they may want to, and as much as they may be men who are abusing the system, and people are being used as mules, whatever, that's disgusting. They're here legally. You can, hear their asylum cases faster, and you can be more stringent in hearing their asylum cases, but they're not here illegally. The Biden administration made sure that this was, they actually really reclassified a lot of this illegal immigration to legal immigration. So they're here legally, and that's now going to be one of the most difficult things for the Trump administration to deal with, because in the last few years, a huge proportion of the people who crossed the border, and there were a lot of people crossing the border, did it through expanded asylum. So good luck with that. It's a totally different ballgame than just taking people out who cross the border illegally.
Yeah. So in any case, the fight is, I guess, sort of resolved for now, but an interesting window into how things are going to go, how Trump is approaching things, how, he sort of has an interest in picking these kind of fights for show, in throwing the weight of the United States government around. And so it looks like we have a resolution here with Colombia specifically, but I don't think this issue of upset and a sense of like the dignity of a whole country being threatened by the use of these military assets and the deportations and the treatment of, Colombians or Mexicans or, people from Honduras or whatever, I don't think that issue is going to die down because you've already had a number of other heads of state express their upset about it.
Last thought, actually, is just on Petro. It reminds me a little bit, going back to AMLO, Trump had a very interesting relationship with AMLO, somebody who is like, I guess, Latin American politics are so interesting and they confuse our binary in interesting ways, like our left-right binary in interesting ways.
For sure.
And Petro obviously is different than AMLO, although they're not entirely dissimilar, and Trump loves those relationships with other charismatic leaders. He obviously likes being able to stomp on other countries and flex America's power, but it is kind of interesting how he can get on the same wavelength. And you were saying that Petro's letter sort of matches the freak of Trump in terms of incredible press releases and tweets. So I don't know. I mean, maybe this is the beginning of an interesting relationship that Trump has with some of these genuinely charismatic and interesting leaders in Latin America.
Yeah, well, Colombia has long been sort of our strongest. I mean, because they mostly have had these extremely right-wing governments that we are very cozy with. And
lots of drug cooperation, yes.
Very much so. And Petro is a real break from the typical political mold in Colombia. It was a big deal when he was elected, et cetera. So in any case, very unusual to have this kind of fight between the U.S. and Colombia, which has been a very reliable ally for us in the region.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.